It wasn't too long ago that I did a multi-part video on the political compass, and I had some considerable criticisms on how it was laid out and the general phrasing of the questions. I was encouraged to check out the website isidewith.com, where I could take a quick survey to find out which political candidate I supposedly most identify with in the upcoming 2016 presidential election. What could go wrong? Before I go into this, though, I really want to say that I have no affinity towards any of the candidates in any party, so I'm really interested in seeing who I get matched up with. Let's get started. Before I get to the questions, let me explain how it works, which is a bit unique. Beyond the simple yes or no answer, they also have a pull down of various more specific answers, presumably things given by the candidates themselves, along with one where you can just fill in your own answer. Because I have no idea how filling in my own answer would affect the outcome, I didn't use it. You can also decide how important the question is to you on a sliding 5-point scale. Because I didn't find any of the questions irrelevant to me, I never answered on the bottom portion of the scale. At worst, I picked the center position, which indicated that it was only marginally important. I will be presenting this just like I did with the political compass, but with less questions, so I can get it all into one video. What is your stance on abortion? Pro-choice, but providing birth control, sex education, and social services could help reduce the number of abortions. Most important. I'm fine with people deciding they want to have an abortion, but my personal preference would be for people to make that decision before they get pregnant in the first place. Abortion ought to be the last option if all else fails. It shouldn't be a fail-safe for people who don't want to bother to plan for things ahead of time. Do you support the legalization of same-sex marriage? Yes, but allow churches the right to refuse gay marriage ceremonies. Most important. This might surprise some people, but I really don't care if churches perform gay marriage ceremonies or not. They can if they want. They can refuse if they want. There will be plenty who decide that they're willing, and people can go to these if they choose. Otherwise, you can go have a civil ceremony, which is probably even better. The fewer people who waste their time in a church for any reason, the better. The fact is, these people have a right to make decisions because they are registered religious organizations. Should a business based on religious beliefs be able to deny service to a customer? No. All customers deserve to be served and treated equally. Most important. Now you might wonder, in light of the last question, how I can be fine with churches discriminating in gay marriage, but not for other non-religious businesses. It's because the businesses are not specifically religious. It's one thing if a business is set up and licensed to provide a particular sectarian religious view. If you set up a 501c3 non-profit religious organization, knock yourself out. Discriminate against anyone on religious grounds that you want. But if you want to be for-profit, you have to follow the same non-discrimination laws as everyone else. You don't get to have it both ways. Should the government increase environmental regulations to prevent global warming? No. Global warming is a natural occurrence. Not very important. Now, I don't want to say that man has no impact on the natural world because of course we do. However, I am not convinced that global climate change is primarily caused by man, especially in light of the evidence. We've known that the sun is going through a warming phase, during which the temperature on Earth rose. That ended nearly 2 decades ago, and since then, we have not seen any more rising temperatures. We have to realize that we're not responsible for everything. We are not to blame for every bad thing that might happen. We know that the planet goes through temperature cycles naturally that we have little, if anything, to do with. That's not to say we shouldn't exercise responsibility for our actions and protect the environment, but this whole radical environmentalist bullshit of recent years has all been about politics and not saving the planet. Should natural parks continue to be preserved and protected by the federal government? Yes, but allow more public access. More important. I'm good with having natural parks and nature preserves, but there are so many areas that are paid for and supported by taxpayer money that the taxpayers have little to no access to. If my tax money is going to pay for these preserves, I deserve to be able to enjoy them. Do you support the use of hydraulic fracking to extract oil and natural gas resources? Yes, but increase oversight. Not very important. I'm all for any kind of energy research we can get, especially energy research that will free us from the Middle Eastern oil that we're so addicted to. But we need to realize that replacing oil with inferior energy sources is foolish, which seems to be the direction a lot of leftists seem to want. So long as it can be done safely, I'm fine with virtually any form of energy development. Should employers be required to pay men and women who perform the same work the same salary? No. There are too many other variables such as education, experience, and tenure that determine a fair salary. Most important. The fact is, men and women who perform the same work already make the same salary. This ridiculous 77% nonsense has been thrown around by radical feminists looking for an emotional hook for far too long. The research has been quoted completely out of context. People don't realize that it doesn't perform an apples-to-apples comparison of men and women in the exact same position with the exact same background doing the exact same work. It's an overall view of the salary of all women compared to all men, ignoring the fact that women tend to choose lower-paying professions where they don't have to work the same number of hours and have the same level of responsibility. Let's get rid of this ridiculous nonsense. People are paid what they're worth, and their gender has nothing to do with it. Should able-bodied, mentally capable adults who receive welfare be required to work? Yes. Adults who receive government benefits should be required to work. Most important. If you can work, you'd better be working. I've even said before that if you want to get a welfare check, you'd better be willing to go out on the freeway and clean up litter or something similar. No one who can work should ever get a free ride. Should all welfare recipients be trusted for drugs? Yes. Test anyone receiving money from the government, including employees and politicians. More important. If I have to get a drug test at work, why shouldn't people who work for me have to do the same thing? My taxes pay the salaries of government employees and politicians. I want to know what they're smoking. I also want to know what welfare recipients are doing because I don't want anyone to be taking any drugs, especially if it's keeping them on the public dole. Should every person purchasing a gun be required to pass a criminal and public safety background check? Yes. Not very important. I do agree with this, but not strongly. I'm more concerned with having people be trained in how to use their guns once they get them. Trust me, I've seen a lot of real idiots who got their guns completely legally, who passed all the background checks, yet are complete morons who carried them around in public where there were no concealed carry laws, who pulled them on people. In fact, I know one particular moron who pulled a gun and dry fired it at a good friend of mine as a joke. These people have no business owning firearms at all. Do you support increased gun control? No. More important. I suppose it depends on what you mean by gun control. Yes, I support keeping guns out of the hands of criminals and the mentally incompetent. Yes, I want gun owners to be well trained in how to handle their guns as well as how to store them safely. In fact, I have no problem with mandatory gun registration across the board. The ridiculous paranoia that someone is going to come and take your guns away because you let anyone know you have them is just idiotic. I do not support any legislation that would keep legal firearms out of the hands of intelligent, trained, and rational American adults. Should there be term limits set for members of Congress? Yes. Term limits are a necessary political apparatus to prevent corruption in our government. Most important. This is something that shouldn't have to be true, but it is. If Americans went to the polls intelligently, if they knew the issues and voted rationally, then I wouldn't say. But we all know that the majority have no clue what they're doing, that they only care about how a candidate looks on TV or some random soundbite that they heard, and therefore, to protect the American people from their own stupidity, I think we need to keep dishonest politicians, and let's be honest, all politicians are dishonest because the American political system rewards dishonesty and punishes honesty, from developing too much power in the short amount of time that we keep them in office. Come back again when the American voters get more intelligent. Do you support the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act? No. More important. Obamacare is inherently unsustainable. It is going to cost us far more than they say and not provide what they promise. There are better ways to do it, and unless we're willing to do those things, and that might require changing up the entire system, this just isn't going to work. Do you support the legalization of marijuana? Yes, but only for medicinal use. More important, I hate drugs, period. Where there are legitimate medicinal uses, that's fine. And there are things where marijuana has a legitimate and demonstrable aid to people with certain conditions and illnesses. This should only be through recognized and licensed and well-controlled outlets, only with a legitimate doctor's prescription. I do not support drugs for any recreational purposes, period. Should the federal government increase funding of health care for low-income individuals? No. Not very important, though. Ideally, I'd like to get rid of low-income individuals entirely, but I think in the meantime, keeping federal funding to only serious and emergency care should be provided. Keep regular checkups funded. In fact, I might even make them mandatory as a consequence of Medicaid and Medicare, but not just a free ride on anything that you want. Would you support increasing taxes on the rich in order to reduce interest rates for student loans? No, and move all loans to the private sector. Most important, government-backed student loans are to blame for the ridiculously high cost of college education today and should be entirely eliminated. Get rid of the provisions that they cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. Make private loan companies actually take a look at these students to see if they're going into a serious and growing field where they can actually repay the loans. It will reduce the cost of education as well as make students more responsible. Do you support the adoption of Common Core national education standards? Yes, national education standards will help improve our national average and better prepare students for college. Most important. Now, I don't know that I care for the Common Core provisions, but I do think that we need a national educational standard that is required in every single school, public, private, and home, in order to get credit for having an education at all. Every student should learn the same core principles in every class across the nation at the same time, so that if anyone moves, whatever school they end up in will be at the same general level. This needs to be taken entirely out of the hands of local school boards. It stops stupidity like creationism. And let's be honest, these school boards, they're not trained educators. They don't know what the fuck they're talking about. That's the problem, is we're talking about a bunch of morons who are elected by local people who are also morons, who just want their religions in the classroom. Fuck all that. That's ridiculous. Should the government decrease military spending? Yes. More important, America needs to stop being the planet's policeman. I'm not saying we should become isolationist, but we only need to act where there's a direct and demonstrably important effect on our national security and national interests. Enough with buying military hardware that we don't need. If we didn't spend so much time going on a worldwide terrorist cruise, particularly through the Middle East, and trying to force coups of foreign governments we don't like, we wouldn't need nearly the military budget that we have. It's time we grew up and stopped being the bully on the beach, kicking sand in the face of every 97-pound weakling that we come across. Should foreign terrorism suspects be given constitutional rights? Yes. Just like U.S. citizens, terrorists should be given a fair trial in federal courts. Most important, the Supreme Court has already found that non-citizens have at least some constitutional rights. This ought to go for everyone. We don't get to pick and choose. If we're going to hold these people in our jails, we need to treat them like criminals, and that means they get legal representation, they don't get to be tortured, they have to be fed, etc. It also means we don't get to throw them in cells for years and years and years on end and forget about them. If we cannot respect our own laws with regards to terrorists, well, maybe the terrorists have a point. Should the U.S. formally declare war on ISIS? No. We should stay out of Middle Eastern conflicts. Most important. As much as I dislike ISIS, it's really our fault that they exist. We spent so much time meddling in the Middle East, destabilizing governments, killing leaders, and destroying infrastructure. It's no wonder that a group like ISIS has risen up based on hatred for the West and wanting to take over the suffering nations that we've left behind. We need to get the hell out of the Middle East entirely and let them work out their own issues. Should illegal immigrants be given access to government-subsidized health care? Yes, but only for life-threatening emergencies or infectious diseases. More important. Public health is important, and anything that threatens it needs to be addressed. We can't just let them have everything for free, otherwise it's just another excuse for them to cross the border illegally just to get free stuff. If they pose a threat, treat them, arrest them, and deport them. Do you support stronger measures to increase our border security? Yes. Most important. Our borders leak like a sieve. We have no control over what comes in and what goes out, and that's no way to run a nation. I don't think there's any legitimate reason to allow someone to sneak across our borders. If they have a reason, they can go to a U.S. consulate and file a request for a political asylum. Just wanting to be here is no reason that you actually get to come. Should immigrants to the U.S. be required to learn English? Yes. Most important. Of course they should. This is an English-speaking nation. That doesn't mean that they must only speak English, but if you cannot communicate in the common tongue of the land, you really don't want to be here. Learn the language, educate yourself in the culture, and blend in with the American people. So that was all the questions. So now it's time for the big reveal. According to the survey, it says I side with Marco Rubio on most 2016 presidential election issues at 77%. The problem is, when you compare my answers to Rubio's answers, what I consider to be the most important issues are the ones that we don't agree on at all. I'm pro-choice, he's anti-abortion. He hates the gays, I support equality for all. In fact, just about everywhere that we disagree, it's on one of my most important points. So no, there's no way in hell that Rubio would ever get my vote. Just like the next closest, Hillary Clinton at 75%, she's got no shot in hell of getting my vote either. As is really no surprise, there's nobody either declared or likely to run who represents my views at all. None of them are actually conservative, and that's really pretty sad. Why don't you take the survey and post your results in the comments below? Do you think you got a good result? Why or why not? I'm not sure how I feel about this because I don't think there's a good match for me in the 2016 candidate pool. Anyhow, make sure you make your thoughts known and like, subscribe, and share this video so we get an even wider range of views. Hope you enjoyed this short look at this particular political survey, and we'll come back soon for other videos. Until we meet again, take care.